So I want to start off by just checking what your favorite spaces in your home are, because I've got my favorite spaces. For example, the bathroom is everything for me. What's yours?
Mine is definitely the kitchen.
Yes.
That is my happy place. When I'm there, nobody bothers me. Like, I'm in my
Not
happiest.
even to want to taste your food.
No, not even for food or anything. I sit there and I will just have my laptop work or a book and read.
Yes.
It's just my happy place.
And for you, Funega?
The kitchen. I love cooking. It's a passion. I have my own catering gigs. So cooking is definitely up there for me.
When I talk about property ownership with me, I am a romantic property buyer. It's the neighborhood, the trees, proximity to cafes. I can see me going for walks with my kids and my partner. I'm not thinking about the crime rate so much. I'm not thinking about proximity to schools and hospitals. I'm not thinking about the bones of the property. And then there are other people who are maybe like functional property buyers or who think about the logistics. So they don't see the trees, they don't care for the cafes. They're going to be like, when was the structure built? Where are the engineering plans? You know, the wiring. And so what kind of home buyer would you say you are? Like,
I'm definitely a romantic buyer.
so what goes on in your head? Like, my God, the parties we could have in the garden. Yeah. What's the last thing you think about?
I mean, sure. Last things like, the nasty surprises that come later, like the wiring. I just rely on, do I have an electric certificate that says this thing is fine, But you get diligent buyers who actually send someone to assess property and identify all of these defects, which will ultimately impact insurance in some instances.
I think the beauty in having a group is that you would have the different personalities. And then where the thing that I miss might be a thing that you catch. What kind of property buyer are you, Funega?
I'm very, very diligent and practical. Yeah, to the point that I check crime stats per suburb, and you can even filter in terms of what type of crimes. There's so many things that can go wrong with buying a property. I'm a single mom, so for me, my safety and security and my daughters, because I have a baby girl, is very important to me. So I'm not going to live anywhere. I'm very conscious of it having to be safe so that if we take a walk, I don't have to stress that I'm in an unsafe environment. The way the building is also constructed in terms of things like your roof, your floors, cracks in the property, electrical compliance. We live in a world of load shedding. Do you have inverters? Do you have backup energy? Those are all sorts of things that are kind of important to me.
Tell me about like funding when it comes to these stockfell ways of acquiring property. Do banks finance stockfells? Because banks would obviously want proof of income. What's the stance there in terms of funding?
A stokvel is not a legal entity per se, right? Essentially, we're just individuals. That's how the banks view it. So what would need to happen is if we decide to buy it in all our names, then all 10 of us would appear on the title deed, which would be a recipe for disaster, right? So I would not recommend that at all. Then they would need to look at all our credit profiles, all our affordability, and. So it will just be a logistical nightmare. Then the second scenario is if you then register in a particular entity, like a company or a trust or a cooperative or something along those lines, then the bank would look at that company or that trust or that cooperative. If, for example, it's a brand new company or a brand new trust, the banks would look at the directors to provide surety on behalf of the entity while you build up your portfolio, so that after a year or two now you've got income, then they rely less on the directors or the trustees, but rather the financials of the entity that you've selected.
Would you say that this way of acquiring property, is it best if we are each going to buy each other's homes in our personal capacity? Is it best if we're going to buy a home collectively for holiday rental? Is it best if we're going to buy a home for long-term leases? Is there a specific usage that you think people must tend to lean on or seek to do? Or is it really just at a case by case and whatever the stockful requirements are?
I think really it's a case by case, and it depends on where you are, right? Because you may find that, for example, we may already have our primary residences, so we're looking to get into the investment space. Or you could have already started investing, but you're looking at diversifying or getting, or just enjoy that sense of community that investing with others does, because we bring different perspectives. So even if I started investing by myself and it's very lonely, I've got no one to bounce ideas off of. So whereas if we now form a stokvel, now we've got somebody who's more practical, somebody who just looks at how pretty the place is or whatever. So I think it really does depend. The whole reason why stokvels are so successful and they've lasted so many years is research by one of the financial services industries actually said people would rather default on like their credit cards or their store cards, but not on their stokvels, because yay, it will come for you. That is how serious it is, right? Because now you know that if you haven't paid, the treasurer is on your funega.
Yes,
You know what I mean? You have to face it's your aunt, it's your mom, it's your church members.
An
Institution, right? So whereas if our goal really is let's get our primary homes, now we're all saying let's go. You know what I mean? If we're saying let's start investing, now we're saying let's go, we are all committed. And that is really the success depending on what we want to do.
You could buy property that's like, I don't know, 2,000 kilometers away from you. So what would be our burden or responsibility in terms of like the state of the property and the grounds around it?
You firstly have to disclose that to your insurer, because the property is usually unoccupied for 60 or more days. So it's important that you ensure that you have the correct type of cover and that you have extended theft cover, because the property isn't one that people are in and out of on a daily basis. Maintenance is obviously extremely important, especially in properties that are not usually occupied. Things like roofs, because you are looking out for things that occur naturally, like storms. What is going to happen if there's a storm and nobody's at this property? It goes without saying, security is a major one to look out for as well. With the holiday residents, you have to ensure that you've complied, at least from an insurance perspective, with what you said your security devices were. So if you say you have an alarm and it's got 24-hour armed response, and you decide your properties in KZN and you live in Joburg that you don't turn the alarm on, then you've defaulted contractually on what you said was there. So you have to be so conscious of the things that you tell your insurer.
But I wanted to ask Funi just one question relating to, your property is 1,000 kilometers away from you. There are things, like after a storm, you are expected to inspect your property and do all these things, which is critical from an insurance point of view. If I can't do those things, what happens?
Hire someone who can. You've got to protect your risk. It's your home. It's a thing that you've bought that home for a reason, either for your kids to have nice holidays or it's your main residence. Whatever it might be, you want to protect it at all costs. So it's important for you to put yourself in a position where you put your best foot forward.
So given all of this conversations for the group that owns property together, what would you say the 3 or 4 important things are?
So I would say number one is, if you're going to buy a home, make sure that you've inspected that home thoroughly. If you can, invest in a professional coming to take a look at the property, specifically an architect or an engineer. They can speak to not only the structure, but the electrical compliance at the property as well. So have that home inspected, because you do not want to be caught with your pants down. The second one is be very prudent around which insurer you are opting out to take an insurance package
Knowing the
with.
best insurer is Momentum Insure.
What's important is that obviously different policies have different terms and conditions. Depending on why you are also buying the property, what is covered is important. Does it cover tenants? Doesn't it cover tenants? So the type of policy that you have is extremely important, and you have to be prudent about checking it. Number 3, I know that the economy is tough, but if you have an asset like a home in particular, which costs anything from $1 million and above, you cannot default on your insurance premiums. That is a huge investment to lose because you didn't pay your premium that you had due. The fourth one is what I agreed with you on: have a caretaker, look after the property.
And on that note, I think we are wrapping up this conversation. Thanks, girls. It was fun. And I mean, listen, don't judge me as a romantic house buyer. We're all good. Look, everybody, I mean, listen, God loves me as I am.